Welcome everyone, this is Andrew here with Spark Finance bringing you the big business news of the past week. To start off with, we have another story coming out of Microstrategy. We spoke about this one before. Remember, they were taking all of their excess cash flows and dumping it into Bitcoin, and they thought it would do better than the US dollar. Well, they now announced that they will be offering a $600 million note or debt in order to buy yet more Bitcoin. So this is pretty big news here that they're going so heavily into Bitcoin. They originally purchased Bitcoin back in August 2020, and now they're going to be doing it again. The senior convertible notes are going to be due in 2027, and they did say that they plan to use this bond offering not for their regular business, but to buy more Bitcoin. They could also up it to $690 million if there is a lot of demand for the debt. Their holdings from before, when it was back in August 2020, that's actually worth $3.5 billion. So this strategy has been working pretty well for them. But it's going to be interesting when this company, Microstrategy, is known for not their business intelligence software, but instead for just betting all in on Bitcoin. Then we have CVS Health, which reported quarterly earnings of $1.30 per share, which was actually 6 cents above estimates. So a lot of people were going to pharmacies and they were picking up the local testing units for the quick tests and also taking vaccines at the pharmacies. So they had this nice boost in their earnings. Then we have Facebook coming out, and they are reportedly designing a smartwatch that is going to be a direct competitor to Apple Watch and Fitbit. It's going to track your fitness as well as do stuff like sending messages, which a lot of these other smartphones or smart watches also do. So if you didn't think that, I guess, giving Facebook all of your social information was enough and you just want to see how much information you can really give them, now you can send them all your personal data on your messages, and you can send them all your health data as it tracks it while you're running. So I guess that's good. Speaking of the privacy concerns with that, the New York Department of Financial Services actually did an investigation on Facebook. And they were saying that there was some weird practices there with their data capture methods. So Facebook was actually collecting unauthorized data from people about their medical conditions, their finances, and their religious practices, right? And the user did not consent to this. But the way they were doing this is that other apps, such as a personal health app like Flow, they were using a trick in the software development kit to basically have the code harvest data and then send it to Facebook. And they would compile all this data and then link it to your social media account. So this is something where it's like behind the scenes, you never consented to this, and yet they're collecting all the data. It's very scary, right? And then they found out that, well, they were also collecting a lot of data on minors, which is actually, I believe that's illegal, and it's definitely against Facebook's terms of use. So this is a big thing here that, I mean, it was investigated by New York, but now they're saying it needs to be kind of looked into on a bigger scale. And Facebook, of course, came out and said, oh no, don't worry about it. We're making some software applications that are going to assist with this and prevent companies from giving us this data. But once again, when these companies give the data to Facebook, it helps Facebook. So traditionally, they haven't been going after them to kind of put a stop to that practice. But we need to see what kind of, I guess, larger picture people can come after Facebook and demand better privacy. Then we have NVIDIA, another one. NVIDIA is being investigated by the Antitrust Commission for, well, the Federal Trade Commissions for antitrust concerns, right? Every time you have a company doing a merger, this is what happens. Google, Qualcomm, and Microsoft actually came out and they said, wait, what's going on here? These guys are going to have a monopoly. NVIDIA is trying to purchase this British counterpart, UK counterpart ARM. And when they do that, they're going to control too much of the market, right? So it's just, every time you have a merger, you end up getting investigated for antitrust. And it's kind of interesting here that Microsoft, which is known for being the monopoly from the 80s and 90s, is now the one accusing other companies of being monopolies. So you have the irony of that as well. That being said, if NVIDIA does purchase ARM, that is, you know, looks like a giant consolidation in that industry, and one that, compared to these other mergers that were investigated, actually looks like it might be a bit anti-competitive or a monopoly. In Texas, we have this deep freeze that's been all over the news, and there were at one point 4 million people that lost power in the state of Texas. This winter storm that arrived, it was hitting areas like Austin and Houston with snow, which traditionally did not have these cold temperatures down into the 20s. So what happened was all of the power systems started failing. The wind turbines were not made for winter environments. The natural gas infrastructure, the pipelines and everything, they were not made to be winterized. They froze up. All these problems happened at the same time, and the grid went down and all these people lost electricity. It looks like now we have about 365,000 people were able to get power back, but that's still a lot of people that are out of power. Then you have natural gas production across the United States down 20% over the last week. They had to up the natural gas use in Texas to kind of account for this cold weather, right? And this is a time when we had seen in previous videos, we talked about a cold snap in Asia driving up natural gas prices. Well, on top of that, Texas, they produce 25% of the United States' natural gas. So while all the frozen oil and gas wells and pipeline infrastructure are taking place there, the production of natural gas in Texas is actually down 30% as well. And this has to do a lot with inflation now and inflated prices on different assets. We see that in retail sales, which were up 5.3% in January. And that was helped by, all of the stimulus money coming out. The expectations were only for 1.2%, and it came in at 5.3% increase. And previously, before this, we had 3 straight months of decline. So economists are looking at that saying, other than the stimulus, is there any reason why that would have such a jump? On top of that, the producer price index was up 1.3% when the estimate was to only be up 0.4%. Inflation once again. Then copper prices, I mean, can you see a trend here with all of this going on, right? Copper prices just hit a 9-year high. Normally, copper's around $2.50 a pound, but just recently it hit $4 a pound. And copper is used in everything, whether it's your smart electronics, your smartphone, the computers, the wiring in your house, the data and infrastructure for the internet. I mean, all that stuff uses copper, and the price has gone up significantly. Bonds are also acting interestingly. The yield on the 10-year Treasury rose to 1.34% from 1.29%. And that is the highest level in a year. And this is despite the Federal Reserve keeping the official interest rate at 0 and then buying $80 billion worth of Treasury bonds every month. And yet, for some reason, the interest rates spike. So we really have to keep an eye on this, because when that system breaks and interest rates go up in defiance of the market, that's going to be interesting. Then SpaceX came out and they completed an equity funding round of $850 million last week. That puts the total market cap or net worth of the company at $74 billion. And this is a private company. It's not publicly traded yet. The shares are trading on the private markets right now at $419.99 a share. Now, this latest funding round represents a jump of about 60% in the company's valuation from its previous round in August 2020. And at that time, SpaceX raised nearly $2 billion at a $46 billion valuation. So it's kind of crazy how they can go up to in the 70 billions from 46 just in a year. Berkshire Hathaway came out with their SEC filings. Everybody loves to dig into that data, right? Because you get a lot of interesting information about what the bigwigs are doing and Warren Buffett, right? And we talked about oil stocks before, right? How maybe oil can make a comeback with coming out of the pandemic and how it was knocked down so much. We had negative $0 a barrel of oil at one point. Well, Warren Buffett's Berkshire Hathaway just increased their stake in Chevron and some other oil companies. So that was an interesting one there. They also put money into Verizon, Marsh and McLennan, Merck, and Kroger. The Verizon stake that they have is now worth $8.6 billion. Imagine just investing $8.6 billion in one company. Verizon is actually now their 6th largest holding that Berkshire Hathaway has. They lowered their stake in Apple by 6% after having a nice run. But Apple is still their largest holding. Berkshire has also been selling off all of their financial companies. They closed their stake in JP Morgan and PNC Financial, and they decreased their position in Wells Fargo by 59%. So across the board there, they were pretty much shortening the positions in the financials. They also did an interesting thing in the commodity space. They closed the position in gold miner Barrick Gold. Does that mean that Warren Buffett thinks the worst of the pandemic, which would drive the price of gold up, is over and price of gold's kind of settled down a little bit? We've been seeing price of gold come down as people fly, excuse me, people fly into other different assets like Bitcoin, right? So it's an interesting time for gold. Mortgage rates flew to the highest level since mid-November this week, a worrying sign for home buyers where the prices are already pretty high and now you have the interest rates going up. The 30-year fixed rate mortgage averaged 2.81% for the week ended February 18th, up 8 basis points from the week prior. So this comes after the 30-year mortgage rate stayed at 2.73%. The 15-year rate mortgage rose 2 basis points to an average of 2.21%, while the 5-year Treasury Index Hybrid Adjustable Rate Mortgage dipped 2 basis points to 2.77%. But we do have to keep an eye on mortgages because remember, that affects a broad swath of the economy. Then Bitcoin just hit $57,000, but by the time I finish this video, it's probably up even more from there. It's up 20% in this past week. MasterCard, PayPal, Visa, they're all going to use Bitcoin. Blue Ridge Bank announced they'll be creating a Bitcoin ATM. The term 1 trillion was trending on Twitter because the market cap for Bitcoin is now $1 trillion. Maybe this has something to do with one in every $5 in circulation is now produced in the past year. A Bitcoin ETF is being, I guess, launched, you would say, in Canada. And this one's interesting because the ETF will hold $1 in Bitcoin for every $1 invested in the company. So what they're doing here is basically they're going to take that money and they're going to buy the Bitcoin and they're going to put it in their own cold storage facilities to keep it secure. And you'd say, why not just, if you're an individual, right? If you're out there and you can just buy Bitcoin, why would you get the ETF? But that's easy for you as an individual, but for a business or a pension or a hedge fund, they need to be able to get around the tax structures and the infrastructure of all this. And it's a lot easier if they can just invest in the ETF. So that gives them that exposure. And that is why it's significant. And there's still some on the table for the United States to have a Bitcoin ETF as well, all creating strong demand for Bitcoin. Then GameStop, right? We had some more news come out. They have the hearings. Keith Gill testified before Congress. This is Roaring Kitty, also known as Deep Effing Value from Reddit. And he had a pretty good testimony there. And he basically said, well, the funny thing is in the background, he had a sign, hang in there with a cat trying to hang on there, putting a meme up, which was pretty funny. He ended up saying he is as bullish as he has ever been for a potential turnaround for the company. He also stated that he is still invested in the company. Remember, he took some of the profits, but he thinks it's good for the long term. And this was just a pretty good speech all around that he did there. He really came off as the average Joe fighting against a bigger institution and profiting from that. Saudi Arabia came out with some information putting $3 billion from their sovereign wealth sovereign wealth fund into US-based video game producers. They put 14.9 million shares of Activision Blizzard they bought, 7.4 million shares of Electronic Arts they bought, and 3.9 million shares of Take-Two Interactive. So they purchased all of these different video game companies that we found out through the SEC filing. At the end of the year, the shares in Activision were worth nearly $1.4 billion, Electronic Arts were worth $1.1 billion, and Take-Two shares were worth $826 billion respectively there. So you have all of these different video game companies getting a huge influx of capital from a sovereign wealth fund from Saudi Arabia. And it's interesting how they're gearing their investments just around what was going on with the pandemic. Obviously, a lot of people are home playing video games. Walmart made some big announcements, but first off, they came up with their online sales being up 69% in the fourth quarter. That is the slowest rate since the start of the pandemic, but it's still good, right? So Walmart also announced they will raise the average wage for hourly employees. This is after the pandemic boosted sales and they have increased demand for workers to handle online orders. The average wage in 2020 for Walmart was $14 an hour, and now with this new upgrade that they're going to do, the average wage is going to be above $15 an hour. And this is without any government change in the federal minimum wage yet or anything like this. This is the private employer doing it on their own. The entry-level position is still going to be $11 an hour, but the average is going to now be over $15. I thought that was pretty interesting that they're taking these steps before there's any official change by government decree. Now, Walmart, this is important because Walmart is the largest private employer in the United States, and they have about 1.5 million hourly workers that are on their payroll. So this is a big deal when they're making these kind of changes, and other companies may have to follow suit. Then you have news from Marriott, the hotel chain. They lost $267 million in 2020. That's a pretty brutal loss right there. That was actually the second largest loss on record for the company. And the largest loss ever was $346 million. And of course, that was back in 2009 with the other financial crisis that we had. So they indicated that 2020 specifically was the most challenging year in the 93-year company history. So even though the other one was worse in terms of the financial impact, this one has been more challenging to navigate. They actually had to furlough about 4,000 employees from their headquarters. Then they furloughed another 2/3 of their corporate staff abroad. And then they also got rid of tens of thousands of staff in the hotels and the different chains that they own. A lot of people got furloughed there with the chance that they might not be able to come back. The one bright note here is that the company expects the new vaccines to really help in recovery in business travel for later 2021 for the second half of the year. So they did offer some bit of a bright side towards the end of the year with where they think the economy might be going. Then we have weekly jobless claims. They were expecting 773,000 newly people filing for jobless claims, and then last week it came in at 861,000, which is a lot worse than was expected. And this is not a good sign for employment market here. I mean, it keeps ticking up on these last few weeks, but we're still watching if the trend is continuing an uptrend or if it will reverse and go to a downtrend. Then finally, we have Roku. So Roku came out and they had a 50% increase in revenue during the fourth quarter. Pretty good, huh? They are claiming that the pandemic has permanently changed the curve on the shift to streaming to view content. Roku now has about 30% of the streaming video player market, so they are a huge player in this. Their sales were up 82%. And with all this, the company was able to have a profit of $67.3 million or 49 cents a share. A year earlier, they actually had a loss of 13 cents a share or $15.7 million. Roku now has 51.2 million active accounts, and the accounts stream on average about 3.8 hours a day of content. That's a lot of content, almost 4 hours of content a day people are streaming over Roku. They also make per user or per one of those accounts about $28.76 in revenue. And this is up 24% from a year ago. So all around here, Roku is really benefiting from the pandemic, and they were already on a tear before the pandemic. So you see them really doing well here and a lot of potential for the future. Thank you for watching Spark Finance. This is Andrew. Tune in next time to see the most interesting business news. Thanks for watching.